We're now coming to the backbench debate on Pride Month, and I call Elliot Colburn to move.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I associate myself with the comments you have just made? But can I begin as one of the co-chairs of the APPG on Global LGBT Rights, very ably co-chaired by the Right Honourable Member for Wallersley, wish everyone a very happy Pride Month indeed. I do want to start, as always, I've looked over some of the Hansard records of Pride debates we've had in this place over the course of the last few years, and I do think it is always right and positive to start with the good news and to start with the progress that we have made, not only in the UK but globally, towards the progression of further equality for LGBT plus people around the world. And last year and the year so far has been no exception, seeing new conversion therapy bans brought in around the world, more countries achieving decriminalisation. But sadly, we do meet here on the backdrop of a very worrying and concerning backward step in many parts of the world, where we are seeing attacks against LGBT plus people, not just where we might expect them to, but here in the UK as well. And I do want to touch on some of those throughout the course of my speech. And indeed, it is a shame, having looked at Hansard debates and Pride debates we've had since the start of this Parliament, and it has become an annual tradition now that we do this. Sadly, a lot of the concerns that have been raised in those debates so far are still very much relevant today, and we have not yet seen enough action on some of the points we've raised, and indeed some points I want to raise today are new. Perhaps if I could start, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with the global. Again, just reiterate the good news that we have seen new conversion therapy bans and decriminalisation. That is to be welcomed. However, that has got to be taken in partnership and in consideration of the extremely serious and worrying backward steps and the anti-human rights agenda that we are seeing in many parts of the world. And I think the best example we can give of that is the anti-homosexuality bill that Uganda has just shamefully passed. And I know full well that the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office has expressed its deep concern and is having conversations, and I appreciate their efforts. And I do, again, to touch on a positive here, I've seen examples of British missions around the world doing incredible work liaising with activists on the ground, sometimes in extremely difficult circumstances. And our ambassadors and the mission staff around the world are to be congratulated. But I do want to urge the government to go further and ensure that this is indeed a foreign policy objective for them, that it is an aid objective for them as well, and that they are using every single tool at their disposal to be able to influence change and support activists in very difficult circumstances, and indeed those who are inevitably going to be fleeing and trying to get away from this level of discrimination. The bill in Uganda carries the death penalty. We know full well that people will be scared for their lives, and we need to make sure that we are there for them, not just in Uganda, but in the many other places that we are seeing backward steps on LGBT plus rights. So I do hope the Minister can give us some assurance that he is having conversations with the FCDO, and that decriminalisation, stopping legislation of this kind, and tackling discrimination against LGBT plus people around the world remains a foreign policy objective for this government. And I do want to commend the good work that I have seen missions do. But if I can bring this debate back to home, again, I want to repeat, sadly, a lot of what has been said in previous debates, but we have to say it again because we haven't seen progress. And I think the obvious thing to start with is conversion practices and conversion therapy. We've been raising this for years now. We've had it promised several times, and we are still waiting for that draft bill to be published. The government has cross-party support to get this through the House and get it done quickly. And it needs to be done, because I want to remind the House and remind those watching that every single day in the UK, right now, there are people being subjected to dehumanising torture, essentially, is what it amounts to, but they are without legal recourse to justice because they are perfectly legal practices at the moment. So it is urgent that we act with speed as quickly as we possibly can to bring forward this legislation. So I do hope that the Minister can give us a bit of an update. I know that we spoke about this in business questions earlier, but I do hope the Minister might be able to tell us a little bit more about the timetable for the Conversion Practices Bill, and I can guarantee him massive cross-party support in this House to get this done. The other issue that we've raised before, but again needs focus, is the increase in LGBT plus hate crime across the United Kingdom. Particularly the hate crime levelled towards transgender people in this country, and I do want to touch on the toxicity around trans issues in a bit later on. I will gladly give way.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way and for making such a significant opening speech. But over 24% of young people experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ+. And does he agree with me? The government really does need to do more to address this, and one of the ways to address this would be to improve the monitoring of gender identity and sexuality in housing and homelessness services.
Yeah. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for that intervention, and I do think she's right, and perhaps through her I could ask the Minister to update us on conversations he is having with the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities about this, because it is a fact that around a quarter of all young homeless people identify as LGBT+, and we know full well what the reasons are. They are going to be fleeing unsupportive households, but many do not know where to go to access support, don't have the capacity to access support, or for whatever reason do not get that help and support. This is a massive cohort of people, so I do hope that the Minister can tell us a little bit more about the conversations that the GEO and DLUC are having to tackle this specific issue, and I thank her for raising it. But there's a new thing on the horizon, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that has come up since we last had a debate on Pride Month that I want to touch on. And that is the government's recent announcement on their review into relationship and sex education in schools. Because I do have concerns, and I know that this concern is shared by many in the education sector and further afield, and this is related to the new trans guidance coming out from the DfE for schools as well, that this RSE review is going to lead to a backward step, is going to end up potentially bringing back a Section 28 by the back door, which we do not want to see back, because it was something that our party had to apologise for, and we've come so far from that moment, and we do not want to see Section 28 being brought back. And many might say, oh, that could never happen. Well, I just ask colleagues again to look to the United States, where several US states have introduced Section 28 style legislation. We cannot allow that to be reintroduced here in the United Kingdom. So I urge the Minister to give us some assurances that this RSE review is not going to break our own pledge to ensure mandatory statutory RSE is given, because it's not just about LGBT plus people. This also teaches about consent. It also teaches women and girls about healthy relationships to avoid sexual violence where possible. It teaches boys not to commit dangerous behaviour. RSE has been a great achievement. It's something that we should be proud of that we are doing, and we should not be shy that this government introduced it, and we should, as a House, send a strong message that we will not accept a watering down of those protections. And I will gladly give way.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. Last weekend, I popped into Bracknell for the inaugural Pride event. As a proud LGBTQ+ champion, it was great to see so many people there. What struck me, aside from the fantastic organisation from Luke and from Brad, Bracknell Forest Council and many others, it was an excellent party. So does my honourable friend agree that we should be celebrating inclusion and diversity?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention, and I heard from a sedentary position that gay parties are the best parties, and I have to agree. Absolutely, absolutely. And Pride is a celebration. Pride absolutely is a celebration. We describe it in many different ways, but we come together and we celebrate, and we are proud of who we are. So I'm grateful to him for attending that event in Bracknell, and I completely agree with him in what he says. But just returning to the issue of the RSE review and trans guidance in schools, I also hope that the government is not going to be tempted by the calls from some to out trans kids to their parents. I benefited, and I know so many people that went to school at the same time of me, that went to school before me, that went to school after me, who benefited from the safe environment that schools provided to be able to talk about these things without fear of it getting back to a household that may not necessarily be supportive. Now, I was lucky. I was naive at the time when I came out, and I should have known that my parents were going to be absolutely supportive, and they were. But school provided that safe and non-judgmental environment for me to be able to talk about things, and I know that has been valued by so many others. I understand the need to make decisions about a child's welfare in correspondence with parents. I don't think anyone objects to that. But the idea of outing trans people to their parents is dangerous, because many families sadly will not be understanding, not be supportive, and we need to make sure that schools remain a safe place for LGBT plus pupils. But I also want to touch on the current toxicity around the trans debate. It would be churlish not to talk about that in some great detail. And again, sadly, this is something that we have spoken about in Pride debates, and I know that many other colleagues will want to talk about this as well today. And I do fear that we as a parliament, the institutions that we represent, have completely lost control now of this conversation, which is being imported from other parts of the world, which often has completely nonsensical and irrelevant arguments being brought into it. And at the heart of this is a very vulnerable group of people who are already marginalised, who are now being further demonised and being pulled into a national discussion that they did not ask for. I will gladly give way.
Thank you very much. I thank the honourable member for giving me. He's making a very important argument and a very important point. And on that specific point about the toxic and damaging debate we've seen in this country, particularly over the past year, would he agree with me that we have to somehow persuade everyone involved in that debate to dial down the rhetoric, to be more reasonable, and to listen to one another? Because I have absolutely no problem, personally, with gender recognition reform or the legislation which was passed through the Scottish Parliament. But I also understand that there are people who have genuine concerns, and by not listening to them, we have inadvertently dialed up the toxicity, and the people who are suffering are the trans community.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I think she's absolutely right. If we don't dial down this rhetoric, and if we don't calm this debate down and listen to each other, we will only ever hear those with the loudest voices and those who scream the loudest. The Women and Equality Select Committee, which I'm proud to be a member of, did an inquiry into this not that long ago. And funnily enough, one of the conclusions we made was that there was a huge amount of agreement. There was a lot that people agreed on. So, frankly, it was quite perplexing to us in drawing up our conclusions that there was such anger, and it did not seem impossible to us that a way forward could not be found. So I do hope that the government can update us on what it plans to do to try and dial down the rhetoric in this space. And I will very gladly give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's moving the debate with his usual common sense and insight. But has he thought that the toxicity of this debate is deliberately created by those who wish to cause fear and then use it to cause division? Because then they can victimise already vulnerable people in a way that is designed to increase the toxicity and the fear rather than dial it down.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady and the co-chair of the APPG for that intervention, and I do think that she is absolutely right. We do, I think, see this sadly being purposefully used. And it brings me on to one of the final remarks I want to make actually in this debate, is that this actually isn't just about trans people or indeed the LGBT plus community more widely. There is a clear, concerted anti-human rights agenda now being, and it will not stop. at trans people alone. It will move on, again, as we've seen in the United States, to attacks on women's reproductive rights, and it will go on to the rest of the LGBT plus community. It will move into other parts of the equality space as well. The idea that this is just a discussion on trans rights is nonsense. It already permeates a lot further than that, and it will continue to do so. So we need to be able to call that out for what it is. That is not to say, as the Honourable Lady from Edinburgh South West has just said, that there aren't genuine, Edinburgh West even, that there are concerns that people are absolutely right to express, and that is our job as parliamentarians as well, to help navigate those conversations and come up with good legislation and good ways forward. But we need to be setting the standard in this place, and we mustn't allow Parliament to do that. Now, I can see by looking around the room we won't have that today, which is reassuring. But I do hope that colleagues who are not in this debate today do take note and do recognise that we need to be responsible ourselves for what we say, for dialing down the rhetoric, and for making sure that we can find a way forward, because the current status quo is just going to crumble. It cannot sustain whatsoever. It is just driving up hatred, it's driving up anger, and the longer that continues, the more dangerous things can become. However, having said that, we have seen good progress being made, not just in the past year, but in the decades that have preceded it. And I do feel very lucky and very grateful to be able to be an openly gay man serving in Parliament, to be living in the United Kingdom, and I do hope that we don't get tempted by some of those siren voices and slip backwards. And I do look forward to hearing other colleagues' contributions and an update from the Minister on the work that the government is doing to try and ensure that Britain remains one of the best places in the world to be openly LGBT+.